Hey everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Strata's Orchestration Kitchen. Today's episode is actually going to be talking about a really interesting new concept, and that concept is the idea of adding always-on identity to your mission-critical applications. And I know this is a topic that a lot of folks are interested in because we hear it a lot. And today, joining me as always is Chef Terry from the Solutions Engineering team here at Strata. And we have a special guest from Strata's product team, Chef Michael. Thrilled to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's take a look at what we're going to be discussing today during this episode of The Kitchen. So, as always, during one of our episodes, we lead off with a quick summary of what is identity orchestration. This is especially important today as we talk about this idea of always-on identity or identity continuity, because orchestration is really this underlying software technology that is important. It's the foundation for making continuity possible. So Chef Terry will take us through a quick 2-minute explanation of what orchestration is. Next, we'll get into IDP continuity, and that's that idea of always on identity. And we'll do a quick whiteboard and we'll walk through what it actually is. And then, just as we do on any good cooking show, we're going to cook live. We've got Chef Michael joining us, who's going to take us through how this is all possible through a live demo. And at the end, as we think about Q&A, we'll share some additional contact information so you can share your questions. So please hold those till the end. But without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to you, Chef Terry, as we look at what identity orchestration is.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. So simply put, identity orchestration is our independent way to abstract away any of the common identity services that might be important to you. Today, we're going to focus on the authentication portion of that, but it's important to know that with identity orchestration, you can abstract away any of the services: authorization, where we source attributes, authorization checks, whatever it may be. We allow you to, in simple low code or no code way, integrate whatever is important to you in however you need to do it. So today we're going to focus on the authentication. We're going to create a scenario that says you've got an application that's protected through a common identity provider that you're invested in, and what happens if that identity provider becomes unavailable. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily offline. Maybe there's a network routing issue. Maybe somebody dug up the fiber optics outside of a key part of your environment. But for whatever reason, your users can't get to the IDP to take advantage of the authentication and authorization services that it does. What do you do in order to keep your people working in those applications? And that's what we think of as IDP continuity, that no human intervention, and you just automatically fail over to whatever is important to you. So with that, let's actually talk about how that works. So this always-on infrastructure allows you to take any application that's important to you. And it doesn't matter what your IDP is. It could be Ping, it could be Okta, it could be Entra, any of those things. Wherever you're invested, we're here to make your life better. And then within that, you've got some of your applications that just can't go down. Whatever SLAs you're getting from your identity provider, while wonderful, may not be enough in order for your business to meet your commitments to your business partners, your customers, etc. And so what we allow you to do is, through this abstraction layer, we can integrate to multiple different ways to authenticate you. So if Ping is your primary identity provider and you also have presence in a different thing like Entra or Active Directory or whatever it may be, it's not a problem. We integrate to both of those things because one of the great things about identity orchestration is you can have multiple instances of each of these things. And so the idea here is that if Ping, for example, is your primary identity provider and it just becomes offline, we automatically know there's a problem. And once we know there's a problem, we can go ahead and fall back to whatever is important to you. There's a couple of different primary flavors of this. Since we're a cooking show, we always want to focus on the flavors. That one is you pivot from Ping to another cloud hosted thing. It may be a different region of Ping. It may be a different technology entirely by going to Entra or Okta or whatever it may be. Alternatively, sometimes you may want to fall back to something that's within your administrative control, maybe something near your applications. Active Directory tends to be a fertile target for that, but it could be other things as well. And so the idea here is that you can automatically decide what is the technology you want to fall back so that you always have that additional level of continuity. But the other thing, it's not just routing authentication. One of the things that happens when you log into any identity provider is you also have identity context. When you authenticate, ping says, great, you are who you say you are. And then it passes back to the fabric or the application context about you. It tells you maybe your first name, your last name, your email, maybe a few other things, group memberships, those types of things. Well, if ping's unavailable, we can't get that information. So one of the fantastic things that we do just out of the box with our orchestration capabilities, we do the schema mapping. That when you set this configuration up, and Chef Michael will walk you through all of this, we'll not just say, look, here's your primary identity provider, and the fallback will be something else. We'll also say, look, here's the context we're used to getting from your primary identity provider. And now how can I get that similar kind of information, or hopefully duplicate information from the fallback pattern? So it's not just about routing the authentication. That's only the beginning of it. We also want to make sure that the user context comes in cleanly so that in that continuity scenario, we know exactly who's coming in, they're properly authorized and things like that.
Which is great. And Shifter, I actually do have one question for you, just as we're looking at this particular screen. One thing we hadn't discussed, the title of our episode today is very much around protecting those mission critical applications. I think an important thing to remind our audience of is, because identity orchestration is the underlying approach and technology that's making this continuity possible, do we have to touch the applications as we're doing this? Is this something where we have to rewrite the applications or do anything special there?
Great question. Absolutely not. It is our job in building identity orchestration as a value add to our customers, is that once you integrate an application to the fabric, you likely never will have to touch it again, even doing these advanced kind of capabilities here. So assuming the application, that the mission critical application that we're talking about, is modern, it speaks OIDC or SAML or whatever modern federation technology, not a problem. The application thinks the fabric is its identity provider. And then the fabric itself will do the integrations to your primary IDP, your fallback IDP, potentially the on-premise instances as well. But the important thing to understand is the application doesn't ever know those changes took place. It just knows it's got an authenticated, authorized user. How the fabric authenticates you will be happen automatically based on the health of your environment. So again, if the primary identity provider is up and running, it will always go to that. That's the ideal path. However, in those rainy day scenarios, sometimes it just doesn't work as you would expect for all kinds of different reasons that could happen. And so we automatically change that. We don't need human intervention at all. We'll just automatically detect there's a problem, and we'll fall back to whatever you by policy to tell us to do.
That's great. No, and I think what's, we titled this the mission critical applications, but what you just shared is this really could be any application. It's not just a modern, it could be a non-standard application, just as you discussed there. Identity orchestration enables continuity for any application, as we're discussing today.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't want to make any of your applications less than top tier citizens in your organization. But most people we recognize are probably going to start with their mission critical. That's fine. We'll meet you where you are.
That's great. And one thing I wanted to add real fast, I know we're chopping at the bit to discuss how this demo is going to work with you, Chef Michael, is as we talk about always on or identity continuity or IDP continuity, we want to be clear in a distinction between this and disaster recovery or near backup. And the reason we're talking about that is there are certainly options out there where you can actually rebuild all the policies into a backup of configurations of your IDP, so that when your IDP eventually comes back up, you would put those config files back into it. And what we're discussing here is a hot or an active failover scenario, so there is no downtime. Is that correct, Chair?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the idea here is that disaster recovery is very critical for any and all of our customers. But the idea of continuity is one better than that. It's essentially if you're saying, I don't want to have an outage window while I recover my data into wherever my recovery pattern is, because that could last minutes, it could last hours, it could last days, depending on how your DR platform goes. We're saying to heck with that. Let's never have an outage at all. Let's just make sure that regardless of how the infrastructure is behaving around us, we always let the critical people into the critical applications. And that's the beauty of the fabric.
I love it. An analogy that just came to mind to me in talking about this is the idea of like disaster recovery and backup is really a scenario of if you have two cars that you could pick from, and one of those cars has all the latest safety technology in it in terms of airbags and crumple zones and 3-point seatbelts, things that lessen the amount that you'll get hurt when you get into an accident, but you're still going to get hurt. It's just lessening the amount that you'll get hurt versus an autonomous car, a new EV that has full self-driving that allows you to get around the accident and avoid it altogether, and you're home for dinner. And so that's the difference really as we're thinking about these two scenarios, is it not?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That the disaster recovery, if you've got really mature practices there, that's the airbags. That's making sure that you minimize the blast radius of a bad scenario. Again, very important. Would never suggest you don't need or want it. But what we're proposing is that let's get you home for dinner and avoid the accident entirely. Let's make sure that you're always up, always running based on what the needs are of the business. So you don't have to be so impacted by any of the rainy day scenarios that may happen.
That's great. Well, we're talking about dinner, we're talking about food. I mean, what do you think, Chef Michael? Are we about that point where we should get into the kitchen and see what's cooking?
Yeah, I can't wait to show you guys what we've been doing in the product to make all this possible. So without further ado, let me take over the screen here
Right.
and show you what it's all about. Okay, so for those of you not familiar with Mavericks, we have a secure hybrid air gap architecture where in the Mavericks user experience here, I'm able to define those identity orchestration policies. And we like to think about it kind of in really simple terms. Your identity fabric, these are the identity services that you want to use. Your applications, whether those are modern applications or legacy applications that accept things like headers, and the user flows. And the user flows kind of bring everything together. That's what the user will see as they're on an identity journey. So the new thing that we've introduced with this product is a way for you to define that strategy. What happens when I'm using I have two identity providers, I have at least two sources of identity, and one becomes unavailable, either a degradation of service or maybe even a misconfiguration. There's something that happens to that. And so you can now define this strategy right here in our UI. And our first strategy that we're dealing with is a failback strategy, which means based on the order that I have defined these, first I'm going to check Okta, and if Okta is unavailable, I'm going to fail back to Entra ID. And in the worst possible scenario, say there is even a higher level of outage, like the internet is down, you can even fail over to an on-prem AD or LDAP system. So one of the things that also makes this possible, we're introducing identity service health monitoring. And so when we deploy our orchestrators, they'll be pinging those identity providers and their configuration to make sure that they're available. And when they're not available, it'll automatically trigger the strategy. So I've got two kinds of user flows I'm going to show you kind of at once today. The first is those modern applications. And if you've been dealing with legacy, this is really our bread and butter. We allow you to modernize your applications with modern identity and even new strategies with continuity without even having to touch a line of code. And so for this particular application, it relies on headers in order to work. And for this particular resource, what we're going to do is say for authentication, we're just going to use that continuity strategy. and it's going to do all of the work behind the scenes to deploy the configuration so that all the identity providers are available and monitored.
This is
The
great.
other user flow.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chef Michael, if I may, I had a quick question for you there. So Chef Terry had talked about he didn't have to touch the application code in doing this, that, you know, as we were doing the pre-kitchen part here. So what you're suggesting, this is all just configuration. We're not touching the code of these applications as you do this.
Yeah, that's right. And so to kind of take a look at, you know, these legacy applications, this is, you know, a very typical scenario. It's moved over maybe from a WAM system or web access management system that's out of service. And this application relies on headers in order for it to be authorized. And so what we're able to do is build a policy. We would proxy all of the traffic to the application. We completely control what comes in and out from an identity perspective. And so what I've defined here is I want to say what the authentication is for a particular protected resource. And this application happens to rely on one particular header that we're going to be sourcing from our continuity strategy. So speaking of headers, talking about our continuity strategy, I can't not mention the schema abstraction layer. Here's the reality. Across all these different identity sources, the claims or attributes or the shape of the data is very different, but your application just kind of needs one thing. And the simplest example here for email, which is probably the universal claim that most apps need, I'm going to be sourcing from my Okta service, the email attribute. From Entra ID, the claim comes across as preferred username. And from my legacy LDAP system, it comes across as mail. So let's deploy these user flows and see what it looks like and test out these different scenarios. So in this particular app, this is a Salesforce app. What if the most important app, you know, that drives your revenue was not available to you? And this is one of the main reasons why we developed this continuity strategy. So this is one of the apps I'm going to be demoing for you today.
And Chef Michael, if I may. Oh, and Chef Michael, if I may, as you're talking about this, the critical app, that's important here, right? Because what we're talking about is, oh, it's not just like emails unavailable for a few minutes. What we're talking about is your entire sales team is unable to do their jobs. Or if you're controlling physical access controls at a hospital or at a work site, people can't get into the facilities or the closets or the places they need to. So this is really important here as you're talking about these mission critical apps. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm simply going to deploy this. I have an orchestrator waiting. I'm going to deploy this new version of the configuration. And let me kind of switch over to kind of what that looks like. So I have my orchestrator here deployed out for my applications. And in order for me to simulate what it looks like to bring an IDP down, I have this other app that sits alongside of our demo scenario here. And what this is doing is controlling network access to these various endpoints of the app. All right, so let's go and check out the login flow. So the first login flow is, this is the happy path. So Okta is up, so I'm going to hit my legacy application. And I'm going to log in with, there we go. And as you can see, I can get into the app. And it has the headers that the application required. Here's the SM user header. My next application, and since I already have a session with Okta, I'm going to log into my Salesforce app. And as you can see, I can get right in.
Got it.
Now let's log out.
Now, I think something that's going to be kind of interesting here, and I'm sure that some of our audience is wondering, is we talked about this idea of IDP outage. And Chef Terry, you did a great job of framing this up. You know, Okta is an excellent solution as you look at your cloud IDP options out there. But, you know, Okta is obviously, for all intents and purposes, up and running right now. Are we going to do something that's actually going to simulate the way that Okta goes down? We're not touching Okta itself, but are you going to be able to do something that shows that?
Yeah, exactly. That's my next step. And that's exactly what I've done here. And so by toggling the availability here, the orchestrator is reporting this health status And you'll be able to see and get reports of this through Mavericks. But what this is basically telling me is that Okta is currently unavailable. Sorry for this long scroll. Let me get down to the bottom here.
No, this is great. This is great. And Chef Terry, you talked about that health check because you talked through that diagram. This is that idea of us being able to check and monitor whether or not that cloud IDP is actually available to know whether or not it can be used.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's our mission and our vision that this is going to happen automatically without anybody having to log into a console and make a switch over. I mean, that kind of is the wrong answer. What happens if this happens in the middle of the night? Let's just automatically fix it so that we know that it's in the right place.
Great. So now that we've taken or made Okta, simulated Okta being unavailable, let's go back to that Salesforce app. Great. So it's going to redirect me right to my secondary IDP. I'm going to log in. The schema abstraction layer is going to build those claims that my Salesforce app needs. And I'm logged in as the same user. It's like nothing ever happened for the user. They can continue working away in Salesforce.
That's awesome.
And so one last demonstration here, and this is really salient to me personally. I live in the South, and hurricanes come and hit us, and you don't really take out our internet for days on end. We still need to go to those big box stores and those pharmacies. And so what I'm simulating here is both of my IDPs are out, but we could be running an Active Directory and do authentication kind of local and on-prem. And so this is the possible worst calamity.
And so what you're suggesting,
now I've taken.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chef Michael. Just one thing I was going to add for context for our viewers here is the configuration changes that you're talking about and you're setting up here via this cloud console, this cloud dashboard, you would have done ahead of time before that possibility of any kind of internet outage. And I think Chef Terry, you talked about an air gap architecture, how the orchestrators themselves are deployed. So what we're suggesting here is internet isn't required for Mavericks to do its job. Is that right, Chef Michael?
That is correct. Yeah. So you're able to deploy your orchestrators, alongside your applications and in your AD, kind of where they need to be. And so what I've simulated here is both of the cloud-based identity providers is out. And so now we're going to go back into Salesforce again. Sorry, this is a very crude login flow, but this is bare bones LDAP login. And I'm going to log in with that same user. And as you can see, that same user was able to log kind of right back in. I've made no configuration changes, have not had to do any hot deployments. This is a great way to provide continuous operation for your applications when those needs arise.
And granted, the example we use here is Salesforce, which is a SaaS app. And so if we'd said the internet was down, we probably wouldn't be using Salesforce, but we would be talking about are those point of sale systems that do rely on a cloud IDP for login. So the registers at your CVS or the registers at a local home improvement store, that's what we'd be discussing and simulating here, just for additional context. Is that right, Chef Michael?
Yeah, exactly. So this is probably even a better example. This may be an internal application that is running a part of your business in those cases, not necessarily Salesforce, since it is a SaaS app. But yeah.
Gotcha. Sorry. And I just wanted to clarify for our viewers, if anybody had called that out, thinking, the internet was down, we're very much talking about those critical on-prem apps that, whether it's point of sale, or in this case, the terminals that a banker would be using at a retail branch of a bank. So, and so all of this was done purely through configuration. Chef Terry, I didn't see Chef Michael touch a line of code. Did you?
No, there certainly isn't. And that's really the beauty and the power of identity orchestration is it's simple, declarative infrastructure as code. It's no code, sometimes a little bit of low code if you're doing something exotic. But the end result is that you can do previously impossible things in order to keep your applications available to those who need it.
Chef Michael, this is spicy. This is great. We love it. And you brought a little Southern cooking to our show today. Was there any other part of the demo that you wanted to touch on, or I think that was phenomenal as we wrap there.
No, this is just one capability. We're excited about making it available for customers. We'd love to have feedback on it, and we can explore all the other recipes that have been covered in prior episodes of this. And I'm really thankful to be a part of this, and we really look forward to having y'all get your hands on it.
That's great. That's great. Well, Chef Michael, honestly, thank you so much for joining us and being able to show off some of the work that your team's been working on in your own kitchen. As you mentioned, we invite our audience to go check out the Orchestration Kitchen Hub, where you can find any of our previous recordings that we've done in previous episodes, as well as register for the upcoming episodes that we continue to do as our series continues. Chef Terry, thank you as always for being my host in this. Any final words that you have as people may want to have questions?
No, the only question and appeal that I have to anybody who's watching this has come to us with your questions. We can actually give you a trial of this and or hold your hand as you're going through it. You're also feel free to drop me an email directly, terry@strata.io, and we'll be sure to get you in line with whoever can answer your question best, be that Chef Michael, myself, or somebody in our broader team. But please don't hesitate to come back in, ask questions. We understand that this kind of continuity isn't possible prior to our introducing it. And so there's going to be a lot of questions on how it works and those things. We welcome them. So please come to us.
Well, that's great. Well, Chef Terry, Chef Michael, thank you both for joining us today. Obviously, really appreciate you joining us and our audience as well. It's always, we know it's a valuable use of your time to join us. So hopefully you got something out of this. Please take Chef Terry up on the offer to talk more. Chef Michael and his product team would love to talk with you as well. And without further ado, thank you for joining us. Please tune in to our next episode, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.